I never thought the sound of silence could be so deafening until I stood in my kitchen at 6 o'clock on Christmas morning, holding a tray of sugar cookies shaped like stars. Cookies that no one would ever eat in a house where no one would ever come. The kitchen counter was pristine, every surface wiped clean from the night before, when I had spent 4 hours preparing a feast for ghosts. The ham glazed with pineapple and brown sugar sat untouched in the refrigerator. The sweet potato casserole, made exactly the way my daughter used to love it when she was 8, remained covered in foil. Even the green bean casserole with those crispy onions on top, the dish my son always claimed was his favorite, waited in vain for someone to appreciate. The love I had stirred into every ingredient. The dining room table stretched before me like an accusation. Red placemats arranged with military precision. The good china that had belonged to my mother, gleaming under the chandelier I had cleaned bulb by bulb the week before. Crystal glasses caught the morning light, each one positioned exactly where it should be for the family gathering that would never happen. 6 place settings for 6 people who had found better places to be. I had even wrapped individual gifts for each empty chair. Not expensive presents. I couldn't afford those anymore on my widow's pension. But thoughtful ones. A silk scarf in deep purple for my daughter-in-law, who had mentioned once years ago that purple was her favorite color. I wondered if she even remembered saying that. A wooden toy truck for my youngest grandson, handcrafted by a local artisan because I remembered how he used to push his toy cars around my kitchen floor while I cooked Sunday dinners. A leather-bound journal for my daughter, who used to write poetry in high school, though I doubted she had written a single verse since then. At the head of the table where my husband used to sit before cancer, took him 5 years ago, I had placed a small framed photo of all of us from happier times. It was from my son's wedding day, the last time we had all been genuinely happy together in the same room. In the picture, I was smiling, wearing the navy dress I had saved up to buy for months. My hair was styled perfectly, and I looked proud, complete. That woman in the photograph felt like a stranger now. The coffee in my mug had grown cold while I stood there remembering. The cookies, cut into perfect star shapes just like I used to make when my children were small, stared back at me from their festive platter. I had made them from memory, the same recipe my own mother had taught me decades ago. Brown butter, vanilla extract, just a hint of almond flavoring. The kind of cookies that made the whole house smell like Christmas morning, the kind that used to disappear within hours when my children were young and thought I was the center of their universe. But that was before. Before my daughter learned to roll her eyes when I called. Before my son started answering my phone calls with sighs instead of smiles. Before my daughter-in-law began avoiding family gatherings where I might be present. Before my grandchildren were taught that visits to Grandma's house were chores rather than adventures. Yesterday, I had called each of them. 3 separate phone calls, each one more desperate than the last. My daughter's voicemail was full. It had been full for weeks, though she somehow found time to post photos on social media of her perfect life that didn't include me. My son answered on the 4th ring, his voice already thick with irritation before I had even spoken. "Mom, we've talked about this," he said, using that tone he usually reserved for telemarketers. "Sarah's parents are hosting Christmas this year. It's just more convenient for everyone." The word convenient cut through me like broken glass. When had I become inconvenient? When had the woman who had given birth to him, who had walked the floors with him through countless nights of colic, who had sold her engagement ring to pay for his college textbooks, become nothing more than an inconvenience? I reminded him as gently as I could that I had hosted Christmas for 23 consecutive years, that this house had been the gathering place for birthdays, holidays, celebrations, and sorrows, that the dining room where we sat had heard first words, witnessed homework struggles, celebrated graduations and comforted broken hearts. But my words seemed to bounce off him like rain on pavement. "Maybe next year, Mom," he said, though we both knew that next year would bring the same excuses wrapped in different words. The phone call ended with the hollow click of disconnection, leaving me standing in my empty kitchen holding a phone that felt heavier than lead. The ache in my chest wasn't new. It had been growing like a slow-spreading cancer for the past 5 years, ever since Richard died and left me alone in this house that had once been filled with laughter and purpose. At first, in those raw months after the funeral, the children had been attentive. They called regularly, visited on weekends, brought the grandchildren for sleepovers that filled the house with the kind of chaos I thought I would never miss. But gradually, almost imperceptibly, life pulled them away. New jobs demanded more hours. New friends offered more exciting weekend plans. New traditions with in-laws took precedence over old traditions with me. I watched my relevance in their lives diminish with each passing month, like a photograph left too long, in direct sunlight, slowly fading, until the details became unrecognizable. I became the obligation they felt guilty about forgetting, the burden they discussed in hushed tones when they thought I couldn't hear, the responsibility they passed between themselves like an unwanted inheritance. "You called Mom last week, so it's my turn next week. Can you check on Mom this weekend? I have plans." Mom seemed fine when I talked to her, so she probably doesn't need anything right now. The transformation was so gradual that I almost didn't notice it happening. First, the Sunday dinners became monthly dinners. Then the monthly dinners became special occasion visits. Then the special occasions became duty calls that grew shorter and less frequent, until they stopped altogether. I watched my children's lives continue without me, through carefully curated social media posts that never included my presence, but always seemed to highlight their joy with other people. Last month, I discovered through a Facebook post that my youngest grandson, Tommy, had taken his first steps. The photo showed him toddling toward his paternal grandmother, the one who lived 3 states away but somehow managed to be present for every milestone I was missing. The caption read, "Grandma Mary was so excited to see Tommy's first steps. 3 generations of love." The comment section was filled with heart emojis and congratulations, but there was no mention of me, no acknowledgement that another grandmother even existed. The irony was devastating. I had been the one to buy Tommy's first walking shoes, little brown leather boots with soft soles that I had found at a specialty children's store downtown. I had spent nearly $100 on them, money I had saved by skipping meals and walking instead of driving whenever possible. In the Facebook photo, he was wearing those very shoes, taking his first independent steps toward a grandmother who hadn't sacrificed anything to be there, while I sat in my living room 3 miles away, learning about this precious moment through a computer screen. I had started to comment on the post something simple like, "Congratulations, sweetheart," with a grandmother emoji. But before I could finish typing, a private message from my daughter appeared on my screen. "Mom, please stop commenting on Sarah's posts. You're embarrassing yourself, and it's making everyone uncomfortable. Please just stop." The humiliation was complete. I had become the embarrassing relative, the one whose love was too visible, whose need for connection was too desperate, whose very existence was an inconvenience to be managed rather than a blessing to be celebrated. I deleted my half-written comment and closed the laptop, but the shame lingered for days, settling into my bones like arthritis on a rainy day. The holidays were always the worst. Every year I would begin preparing in November, driven by some foolish hope that this time would be different. I would spend weeks planning menus, shopping for ingredients, decorating the house, until it looked like something from a magazine. I would research new recipes, polish the silver orange flowers, and create an atmosphere of warmth and celebration that I hoped would draw my family back to me, like moths to a flame. But each year the celebrations grew smaller. First, the extended. Family stopped coming, citing various excuses that all seemed to translate to, "It's not worth the effort anymore." Then my children began alternating holidays, spending Thanksgiving with me but Christmas with their in-laws, or vice versa. Finally, they stopped coming altogether, their explanations growing more creative and less believable with each passing year. "The kids have so many activities now, Mom. It's just too complicated to travel. Sarah's family has this tradition, and we don't want to disappoint them. Maybe we can get together after the holidays when things calm down." The promises were always vague, always temporary, always unfulfilled. This year I had abandoned all pretense of dignity. I had called my daughter on December 20th and cried, actually cried, into the phone, something I had sworn I would never do. "Please," I whispered, my voice breaking with embarrassment and desperation. "Just this once. I need my family around me. I need to matter to someone on Christmas." Her response was a lecture about emotional manipulation and healthy boundaries, delivered in the same tone she might use to scold a misbehaving child. She accused me of trying to guilt them into visiting, of being selfish, and demanding of not respecting their independence and their right to make their own choices about how to spend their holidays. "Mom, you need to understand that we have our own lives now," she said, her voice cool and clinical. "We can't be responsible for your happiness. That's not fair to us or to you. You need to find other ways to fulfill yourself instead of depending on us for everything." She hung up before I could explain that I wasn't trying to manipulate anyone. I was drowning. I was disappearing. I was becoming invisible in my own life, and I was terrified that if I faded much more, I would cease to exist entirely. Have you ever felt like you're slowly being erased from the story you helped write? Like you're watching your own life through a window, seeing all the important moments happen without you? If you understand this hollow ache, this suffocating loneliness, in a house full of memories, please tell me in the comments. I need to know I'm not alone in this darkness. That Christmas morning, as I stood in my kitchen surrounded by the evidence of my foolish hope, something inside me shifted. Not broke. I had been broken for months. Shifted. Like a bone that had been fractured finally, setting itself properly, finding its correct alignment after a long period of painful displacement. I didn't cry. I had no tears left. I didn't call them again. I had exhausted that avenue of humiliation. I didn't post passive-aggressive messages on social media, hoping they would see them and feel guilty. I had learned that guilt was not the same as love, and I was too tired to keep begging for scraps of attention from people who had already decided I wasn't worth their time. Instead, I walked to my bedroom, opened the drawer of my nightstand, and pulled out the old phone book that I had somehow never thrown away. The pages were yellow and brittle, a relic from a time when people still believed in the importance of being reachable, of being found when someone needed them. I flipped through the community service section until I found what I was looking for, the number for the downtown homeless shelter. My fingers trembled as I dialed, not from nervousness, but from the strange sensation of doing something unprecedented, something that would have been unthinkable to the woman I had been just 24 hours earlier. "Sacred Heart Shelter," a warm voice answered. "This is Maria." "Hello," I said, my voice stronger than I had expected. "I have Christmas dinner prepared for 6 people, and I'm wondering if there might be anyone there who would like a home-cooked meal today." There was a pause, and then Maria's voice returned, filled with genuine surprise and gratitude. "Ma'am, that is incredibly generous. We have several folks here who would be absolutely thrilled to share Christmas dinner with you. Are you sure you don't mind the company?" "Mind the company." I almost laughed. I had been praying for company for months. "I would be honored," I said, and for the first time in weeks I meant every word. 2 hours later my dining room was full, not with the family I had born and raised and sacrificed everything for, but with people who understood the value of kindness, who recognized generosity when they saw it, who knew how to say thank you without being prompted. There was Margaret, a woman about my age, who had been living in her car since her disability checks had been mysteriously discontinued by a bureaucratic error that was taking months to resolve. She wore a faded Christmas sweater and helped me carry dishes from the kitchen without being asked, commenting on how beautiful my home was and how wonderful everything smelled. James sat quietly at the far end of the table, a veteran in his 60s who spoke in soft tones about his daughter in California, who hadn't called in 3 years. He had served 2 tours in Vietnam and worked construction for 30 years before. A back injury left him unable to work and eventually unable to afford his apartment. He complimented my cooking with the kind of sincere appreciation that I hadn't heard in years. Rosa, a woman probably in her 50s, told me about her grandchildren. In Mexico, while she helped me serve the food, she worked nights cleaning office buildings, sending most of her paycheck across the border to help support the family she hadn't seen in person in over a decade. She asked for my recipe for the sweet potato casserole and promised to try making it for the other residents at the shelter. We didn't talk about the people who weren't there. We didn't discuss absent children or broken promises, or the particular loneliness that comes from being forgotten by the people who are supposed to love you most. Instead, we talked about the present moment, about the warmth of the food and the beauty of the decorations, and the simple miracle of finding yourself unexpectedly welcomed at a stranger's table. Margaret asked about the Christmas ornaments on my tree, and I found myself telling stories I hadn't shared in years. The paper angel my daughter had made in 2nd grade, carefully painted with watercolors and glitter. The ceramic reindeer my son had crafted in a high school pottery class. Lopsided but precious, the wedding ornament from my 25th anniversary, engraved with mine and Richard's names in flowing script. For the first time in months, these memories didn't feel like accusations. They felt like treasures being shared with people who understood their value. James asked about the photographs on the mantelpiece, and I found myself describing my children as they used to be, not as they had become. The little boy who used to help me bake cookies every Saturday morning. The little girl who used to bring me dandelions she had picked from the yard, convinced they were the most beautiful flowers in the world. The teenagers who had trusted me with their secrets and their fears and their dreams. After dinner, Rosa insisted on helping me clean the dishes, and we stood at the kitchen sink talking about our children, about the particular heartbreak of loving someone more than they love you in return, about the way motherhood can become a kind of slow martyrdom if you're not careful. "The hardest part," Rosa said, her hands gentle with my good china, "is learning that loving someone doesn't mean they owe you anything in return. Even your own children. Love has to be free, or it isn't really love at all." Her words hit me like a revelation. I had been holding my love over my children like a debt they owed, keeping track of every sacrifice, every disappointment, every unreciprocated kindness. I had been loving them the way a creditor loves a debtor, conditionally, transactionally, with the expectation of payment in the form of attention and gratitude and time. But real love, the kind of love I had always believed I was giving, required nothing in return. It was a gift, freely given, not a loan with interest accruing. That night, after my unexpected guests had returned to their temporary shelters and uncertain futures, I sat in my living room surrounded by the remnants of the best Christmas I had experienced in years. The house felt different. Not empty, but peaceful. Not abandoned, but blessed. I opened my laptop and began typing an email to Janet Morrison, the real estate agent whose business card had been stuck to my refrigerator for months. "Dear Janet," I wrote, "I would like to discuss putting my house on the market as soon as possible, after the new year. Please call me at your earliest convenience to discuss pricing and timeline." The decision felt both impulsive and inevitable, like stepping off a cliff that I had been standing on for years, finally ready to trust that I would either learn to fly or land somewhere softer than where I had been stuck. The house sold faster than I had expected. Apparently, everyone wanted the kind of home where you could raise a family and create memories, even if they didn't want the woman who had actually done those things. The buyers were a young couple with twin toddlers who walked through my rooms with stars in their eyes, already planning where they would put the Christmas tree, where they would set up the playroom, how they would use the large kitchen for family gatherings. I watched them measure and plan and dream, and I felt something I hadn't expected: relief. This house deserved a family who would appreciate it, who would fill it with laughter and chaos and the particular joy that comes from people who actually want to be together. I donated most of the furniture to local charities, keeping only the pieces that held meaning rather than utility. The dining room table that had hosted so many birthday parties found a new home at a community center where it would feed people who had nowhere else to go. The rocking chair where I had nursed both of my children went to a young mother's support group. The Christmas decorations, each ornament carefully wrapped and labeled with its story, went to families who couldn't afford to create their own holiday magic. I kept 3 things. My mother's jewelry box carved from cherry wood by my grandfather's hands, a quilt my grandmother had made for my wedding, every stitch a prayer for my happiness, and a single photograph of my children when they were small back, when I was their whole world, and they were mine. With the money from the house sale, I did something my children would have called irresponsible, selfish, even crazy. I bought a small condo near the ocean 2 hours away from the life I had been living, and I put the remainder of the money into a trust for the Sacred Heart Shelter, where I had found my Christmas miracle. Not a local trust that my children might someday discover and contest, but a shelter in another state entirely, where my donations could help women rebuild their lives without anyone questioning my motives or my right to dispose of my own money as I saw fit. I didn't tell my children about any of these decisions until the day before I moved. I wanted to avoid the lectures, the attempts to talk me out of it, the accusations that I was having some kind of breakdown. I wanted to make this choice in peace, without having to justify my right to autonomy to people who had spent years making it clear that my feelings were less important than their convenience. My daughter called within an hour of receiving my text message, her voice high with panic and indignation. "Mom, you can't just sell the house. What if we want to visit? What about the grandchildren's memories? What about our inheritance?" There it was finally spoken aloud. The real concern wasn't my well-being or my happiness or my right to make decisions about my own life. The concern was financial. The house they had avoided for years suddenly mattered when it represented money they wouldn't inherit. I laughed, not bitterly, but with genuine amusement at the absurdity of it all. "Honey," I said, "the grandchildren haven't been to this house in over 2 years, and you can visit me any time you'd like. I'm not disappearing. I'm just moving somewhere that makes me happy." She demanded to know why I hadn't consulted them, why I hadn't considered their feelings, why I was being so selfish and impulsive. The irony was breathtaking. After years of making major life decisions without consulting me, after years of excluding me from holidays and celebrations and milestones, she was angry that I had made one decision about my own life without seeking their approval. "Because," I said quietly, I finally learned the difference between being selfless and being invisible. I've spent 5 years trying to be so selfless that I disappeared entirely. I'm not doing that anymore. My new life began on a Tuesday, February. The condo was small, but filled with light, with windows facing the ocean and a balcony where I could sit with my morning coffee and watch the waves change color with the shifting light. I could hear the ocean from my bedroom, a constant gentle rhythm that replaced the suffocating silence I had lived with for so long. The first morning I made coffee for one, and didn't apologize to anyone for the luxury of solitude. I didn't check my phone to see if anyone had called. I didn't feel guilty for sleeping until I was rested, rather than waking at dawn to begin a day of trying to earn love that would never come. I volunteered at the local library, reading stories to children whose parents worked double shifts and couldn't afford childcare. These children listened with rapt attention, asked questions, hugged me goodbye, and looked forward to seeing me the next week. They didn't take my presence for granted because they understood that love and attention were gifts, not entitlements. I joined a book club where women my age debated novels with the same passion we had once reserved for our children's report cards. We discussed character motivation and plot development, and the ways that stories could illuminate truths about our own lives. For the first time in years, I was valued for my thoughts and opinions, rather than tolerated as an inconvenience. I took a painting class at the community center, something I had always wanted to try but never had time for when my life revolved around everyone else's needs. The instructor, a patient woman named Claire, who was about my daughter's age, taught me about color theory and brush techniques, and the way light could transform an ordinary subject into something extraordinary. I discovered I had a talent I never knew existed, buried under decades of putting everyone else's dreams before my own. My first painting was terrible, a clumsy seascape that looked more like a child's finger painting than art. But my second was better, and my third showed real promise. By my 10th painting, Claire was encouraging me to enter a local art show. The idea was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. When had I last done something that scared me? In a good way, Dari. Months into my new life, I received a text from my son. "Mom, where are you?" "We drove by the house and there are strangers living there. The neighbors said you moved but didn't give us your address. What's going on?" I stared at the message for a long time before responding. The tone was familiar, demanding, entitled, slightly accusatory. There was no concern for my well-being, curiosity about whether I was happy or safe. Just irritation that I had inconvenienced them by moving without providing a forwarding address they had never bothered to ask for. I typed back, "I'm where I need to be. I sent both you and your sister my new address and phone number 6 weeks ago." This was true. I had sent a simple card with my new contact information, along with a photo of my condo, and a brief note explaining that I was happy and looking forward to this new chapter. Neither of them had responded or acknowledged receiving it. He called immediately, his voice carrying the same entitlement I had spent decades enabling. When I calmly explained that I had downsized and moved to pursue my own happiness, he accused me of having a mental breakdown. "This isn't like you, Mom," he said, his tone a mixture of confusion and condescension. "You're acting crazy. Are you taking medication? Have you been drinking?" This is completely irrational behavior. The assumption that any choice I made for my own well-being must be evidence of mental illness was both insulting and revealing. In his mind, the only rational version of me was the one who existed solely to serve his needs and convenience. "No," I replied, my voice steady and calm. "I'm acting sane for the first time in years. I'm making decisions based on what makes me happy, rather than what makes everyone else comfortable." The calls and texts from both children increased in frequency and desperation over the following weeks. But the content revealed their true motivations. Not one message expressed concern for my happiness or curiosity about my new life. Instead, they were focused on how my choices affected them. My daughter's babysitter had quit unexpectedly, and she needed someone to watch the children while she attended a work conference. My son's mortgage payment had increased, and he wondered if I might be able to help temporarily until he got back on his feet financially. They had assumed I would always be there waiting in the wings, ready to solve their problems while remaining invisible in their successes. The realization was both painful and liberating. They didn't miss me. They missed my usefulness. They didn't want a relationship with me. They wanted access to my resources, my time, my unconditional willingness to put their needs before my own. But I had learned something profound in my little condo by the sea, something that had taken me 60 years to understand. Love without reciprocity isn't love. It's servitude, and I was done being anyone's unpaid servant, even if that person was my own child. I stopped answering their calls immediately. I let them go to voicemail where I could hear the progression from demanding to wheedling, to angry, to desperate. I responded to their texts with brief, polite messages that revealed nothing about my emotional state or my willingness to be manipulated back into my old role. I hope you find a solution that works for your family, I would write, or I'm sure you'll figure out what's best for your situation. Neutral, kind, but completely unhelpful for people who were accustomed to me, dropping everything to rescue them from the consequences of their own poor planning. The breakthrough came 6 months into my new life on a Tuesday morning in August. I was sitting on my small balcony sketching the sunrise over the water, a daily ritual that had become as essential to me as coffee. When my phone rang, the caller ID showed my daughter's name, but when I answered, her voice was different, smaller, vulnerable in a way I hadn't heard since she was a child. "Mom," she said, and I could hear tears in her voice. "I need to tell you something. My marriage is falling apart." She cried for 20 minutes while I listened in silence, not offering advice or solutions, just presence. She told me about her husband's affair, about the months of lies and gaslighting, about feeling like she had no one to turn to because she had systematically alienated everyone who might have supported her. "I don't know how to be a good mother when I'm falling apart," she whispered. "I don't know how you did it. I don't know how you held everything together all those years. I look at my kids and I see how much they need me, and I feel like I'm failing them every day. For the first time in years, my daughter was seeing me not as an obligation or a convenience, but as a woman who had navigated the same challenges she was facing. Not as the grandmother who existed to provide free babysitting, but as the mother who had sacrificed her own dreams and ambitions to build the foundation her children stood on. I never felt like I was holding everything together, I told her honestly. I felt like I was drowning most of the time trying to be everything to everyone and losing myself in the process. But you figure it out day by day, choice by choice. You do the best you can with what you have and you forgive yourself for not being perfect. I treated you terribly, she said, her voice breaking. I was so caught up in my own life in trying to prove I didn't need you that I forgot how much you had given up for us. I forgot that you were a person with your own feelings and needs. The apology I had been waiting years to hear finally came, but it felt different than I had imagined. Less vindication, more sadness for all the time we had lost to pride and misunderstanding. "Come visit," I said. "Bring the children. Let me show you where I live now." The reconciliation wasn't immediate or dramatic. It was quiet, like everything meaningful in life. My daughter came alone first, leaving the children with my son for the weekend. We walked on the beach and talked, really talked, for the first time since she was a teenager. She cried when she saw my paintings hung on the walls, realizing her mother had talents and dreams beyond the roles of wife and mother. "I never knew you were an artist," she said, studying a seascape I had painted the week before. "I never had time to find out," I replied. "I was too busy being everything you needed me to be." She asked about my book club, my volunteer work, my new friends. She seemed genuinely surprised that I had created a life that didn't revolve around waiting for her to need me. The surprise hurt a little, but it also felt like progress. For the first time, she was seeing me as Patricia, not just as Mom. My son's transformation took longer and required more work. He was angrier, more resistant to the idea that I had a life independent of his needs and expectations. The conversation that finally broke through his resentment came during a phone call in October initiated by my 4-year-old granddaughter. "Grandma," her sweet voice said when he handed her the phone. "Where did you go? Daddy said you moved away, but why didn't you tell me I miss you?" The innocence of her question, the pure love in her voice, opened a door in his heart that had been locked for months. After she handed the phone back to him, he was quiet for a long time. "She's been asking about you," he said finally. I didn't know what to tell her. "You could tell her that Grandma moved to a place by the ocean and that she would love to see her any time you want to visit," I said. "You could tell her that Grandma has learned to paint pictures and make new friends and that she's happy." "Are you?" he asked, and for the first time in years his voice carried genuine curiosity rather than resentment. "Are you really happy?" "Yes," I said, and I meant it completely. "I'm happier than I've been in years." The visit started slowly. My daughter brought the children for a long weekend in November. My son and his family came for a day trip in December. The conversations were still sometimes awkward, still laden with years of hurt feelings and misunderstandings. But they were real conversations, not the careful exchanges we had been having for so long. My grandchildren loved the beach. They collected shells and built sandcastles, while I watched from my chair, no longer invisible, but not desperately needed either, just peacefully present. They asked about my paintings, and I told them about color mixing and brush techniques. They helped me bake cookies, and I taught them the same recipe my mother had taught me. For Christmas that year, they asked if they could come to me. My small condo couldn't accommodate everyone for an extended stay, so we rented a beach house for the week between Christmas and New Year's. We cooked together, walked on the sand, played board games by the fireplace. My daughter-in-law, who had once made me feel like an intruder in my own family, asked me to teach her my sugar cookie recipe. "I want the kids to have these memories," she said, as we rolled dough together in the rental house kitchen. "I want them to know their grandmother's traditions." My son helped me hang my latest painting in the living room and told everyone who would listen that his mother was an artist. The pride in his voice was something I had thought I would never hear again. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came on New Year's Eve, when my daughter pulled me aside as we were cleaning up after dinner. "I need to tell you something," she said. "When I was going through my divorce, I kept thinking about how strong you were after Dad died, how you didn't fall apart even though you must have wanted to, how you kept taking care of everyone, even when you were grieving. I never appreciated that at the time, but I understand it now." She paused, looking out at the ocean through the window. "I also understand now why you had to leave, why you had to choose yourself. I was so angry when you moved, but I see now that it wasn't about abandoning us. It was about saving yourself. The woman who once defined herself entirely through others had learned to exist as herself. I painted every morning now, not because I was particularly talented, but because it brought me joy. I read books that interested me, not books I thought would make me a better mother or grandmother. I had made friends who knew me as Patricia, a woman with opinions and interests, and a wicked sense of humor. Not just as someone's mother or widow. I still baked cookies sometimes, but now I made them for neighbors who remembered to say thank you, for my book club meetings for the children at the library, who looked forward to story time. I still set a beautiful table, but for dinner parties, where everyone wanted to be there, where the conversation flowed naturally, and no one checked their phone or made excuses to leave early. The silence in my home was no longer deafening. It was peaceful. The difference was that now I chose it. I could fill it with music or television or phone calls to friends, or I could simply sit in it and feel grateful for the quiet space I had created for myself. Today, as I write this story, I'm sitting on my balcony watching the sun set over the ocean. My latest painting, a portrait of my granddaughter building a sandcastle, sits drying on my easel. In a few minutes, I'll call my daughter to check on her as she navigates her new life as a single mother. Tomorrow my son is bringing his family for a visit, and we're planning to go whale watching. The relationships I have with my children now are different than they were before, but they're also stronger, built on mutual respect, rather than obligation, on genuine affection, rather than guilt-induced duty. They see me as a person now, not just a resource to be tapped when convenient. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give your children is the courage to disappoint them. When you stop being everything they think they need, they finally learn to appreciate everything you actually are. The woman who had spent decades making herself smaller to fit into their lives had finally grown large enough to matter, not because she demanded attention, but because she stopped apologizing for taking up space. Not because she made herself indispensable, but because she made herself whole. As I finish writing this, I want you to know something. It's never too late to choose yourself. It's never too late to stop apologizing for wanting to be happy. It's never too late to discover who you are when you're not busy being everything to everyone else. The silence that once terrified me has become my sanctuary. The solitude I dreaded has become my strength. The emptiness I feared has been filled with purpose I never knew I possessed. If you're reading this and you see yourself in my story, if you've ever felt invisible in your own life, if you've ever wondered what would happen if you stopped giving pieces of yourself away until there was nothing left, know that you are not alone. Know that your worth isn't measured by your usefulness to others. Know that love means being cherished for who you are, not tolerated for what you provide. The greatest breakthrough isn't when others finally see your value. It's when you finally see it yourself. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel and activate notifications so you never miss a story that speaks to your soul. Like this video if it resonated with you, and please share it with someone you care about, someone who might need to hear that they matter, that they are seen, that they are worthy of love that doesn't demand they disappear to be acceptable.